we're going to get things kicked off. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today titled Tips for Migrating to Salesforce Financial Services Cloud from Sales and Service Cloud, presented by EMS Consulting. Today's conversation is part of our broader digital transformation series, where we examine the impact Salesforce has on various transformative initiatives within the financial services industry. My name is Pierre Millan. I'm your moderator today, and I'm also a regional vice president here at EMS Consulting. Thank you for joining us. I have the privilege and honor to speak with Jacob Schutt, the principal and chief technology officer at Parallel Advisors. Parallel Advisors is a firm comprised of financial advisors who hail from investment firms ranging from both wirehouse firms as well as RIAs. They support multi-custodian platforms and are based in several offices throughout the US, including San Francisco, Colorado, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Hawaii. Outside of his role as Chief Technology Officer, Jake has had former board roles at the Audubon, California, Richardson Bay Audubon Center, and the Wilman Timberlands. He currently serves as an advisor, board member for CreativeMass.com, a CRM overlay to Financial Services Cloud, and Trustworthy.com, a family operating system for important documents and information. Jake is also published in the work titled Delivering the Paperless Office, an analysis of the 5 steps to help improve efficiency and reduce costs at firms. He has also been a speaker and co-presenter at Dreamforce. You can find Jake on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Jake Schutt. Jake resides in San Francisco Bay Area with his family. Jake, we are honored and excited for this conversation. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really look forward to talking about this. This is one of the topics that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and obviously to the industry at large. So really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, Jake, and we are thrilled to have you. We're excited about the conversation. We think our audience is in for a treat. Before we get started today, everyone is welcome to submit questions through the Zoom chat feature throughout the presentation. We will address them at the end, or we will follow up with you directly via email if we're not able to answer it live. I want to take a little bit of time here to just discuss the overall outline of today's conversation for the folks joining now. I think, as I mentioned before, I think the audience is in for a real treat here. As the CTO, Jake, you're one of the primary driving forces for innovation at Parallel Advisors, right? We talk a lot about your guiding principles for technology, decision-making, and how you have helped lead the advisors team through a migration from Sales and Service Cloud to FSC. Incredibly relevant topic, as you said, for the folks joining us today, because there's a lot of financial services organizations out there that may be considering a migration similar to the one that you just went through, or even, adopting Financial Services Cloud for the first time. So you and your team partnered with EMS Consulting to work through that migration. I think there's a lot to learn from your story, and it can be complex. So what we've done is we've broken it out into 4 sections. The first is the what, so to speak. So why it's an important conversation for the audience today. How did we get here? And very much relevant issues and topics that need to be addressed. The second part of today's conversation will be, how do you do it? So as an organization, what are the things that we need to know, and how do you address those? And then the third is learnings, right? What can we learn from the process you went through, and certainly the journey and your team, and help folks maybe miss any of those potholes or obstacles or challenges, and how to anticipate those. And last but certainly not least, we'll finalize our conversation today on partnership, right? And how you think about evaluating a partner for these kinds of things. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. I know we've got a lot of content to cover. So first of all, can you talk us through your guiding principles, right, for making technology decisions at Parallel Advisors? And more specifically, how do you decide, which technology and which platforms to say yes and which ones to say no to?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And I'll say at the outset that, stubbing our toes is one way that we learned a lot of things. So plenty of mistakes along the way. But one of the things that we do and the way we think about evaluating technology in general is putting it through a crucible of decisions that we sort of come up with. And those are some simple ones, but they help guide us when we're looking at at any technology and keep us on the straight and narrow and weed out a lot of things so that our time is spent more efficiently. And so some of those things are, well, the first one is sort of, it has to be cloud-based. And when we started the firm back in 2006, this was sort of heresy, but it's now sort of the norm. And so we want every system that we use to be cloud-based, and in that way, it's much more, secure and stable, and it can scale more easily, and it's more efficient. And I think everybody knows that today, so that's not that profound, but it does weed out some of the systems even in today's world. The next thing we wanted to do is we wanted to utilize what we perceive to be industry leaders who are innovating regularly and drive value to their clients, or to our clients, and ultimately to our firm. And so by picking industry leaders, you may lose out on some of the newer ones, but that might be innovating more quickly, but you benefit in scale and size and dollars. And that ties into the next thing, which is that we want to make sure that the partners we're using have a very deep development path. We spend a lot of time talking to them about what they have on their roadmaps and the dollars that they're going to contribute and the timelines that they have to continue to innovate. And obviously we want that innovation to be aligned with where we're going as a firm. And so that's actually a pretty good one to spend a lot of time on with the vendors that you're interviewing, because it tells you a lot about them, their firm, and then it also allows you to sort of dovetail into the next one, which we consider is that can we partner with those firms to influence that development path to our own benefit? And ultimately, they make decisions about this, but if we can demonstrate why we think it's relevant for them to allocate their resources in one way or another, it benefits us and will most likely benefit a lot of the firms that they're targeting ultimately in the long run. And so that's something we've done for a long time with many vendors, including Salesforce. And then and so those are the four main ones. We want to be an industry leader, but in our space, but we don't want to be on the bleeding edge of innovation. There's a lot of ways to, as I mentioned, stub your toe, or to potentially get yourself in trouble if you're right on the bleeding edge. And so we want to take stock of where the industry is going, evaluate it, understand the trend, and then canvas that particular niche and find the leaders in the space with the things I've mentioned, with the attributes I've mentioned.
And Jake, you mentioned something there that I believe will resonate very, very deeply with a lot of the firms out there who are considering or perhaps embarking on their journey within the Salesforce ecosystem for the first time, or maybe they're considering a migration. And, so a lot of that is incredibly relevant, and specifically to, the direction not only your firm is going, but the partners you associate yourself with. And I know that Parallel Advisors had previously been on the Salesforce CRM platform, more specifically with Sales and Service Cloud for many years prior to the migration, right? So how did you know that it was, how did you know it was time to migrate or to upgrade up to Financial Services Cloud? What was it about that platform, maybe the data model? What was so attractive to you? And was there something that happened? What let you know it was time? Was there a mile marker? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in this case specifically, we were beta users on the original wealth management edition that Salesforce created. And over the years, it tweaked it quite a bit to service, ourselves and our clients, and to sort of make it what we needed. And it worked very well for a very long time. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but there's this sort of trade-off between having a CRM system rule you and you ruling the CRM system. But the way we knew it was time was that, with the rapid pace of change in our industry, there are better data constructs available, certainly with FSC. And so, that was the real reason we wanted to make the shift. We saw that the benefit of that new data architecture would allow us to continue to grow and innovate in ways that the old one wouldn't. And you could argue that we were a little slow on this, but nevertheless, that was the real thing that made us want to make the jump. It leads us towards things that we can do in the future around AI and proactive notifications or next best action and workflows and all these other things that you can do more nimbly on a better data architecture. You can also push data to your users much more easily without so much manual processes. So those are the things that we identified.
That's very relevant. You mentioned a lot in sort of that response around the data model, right? So, and understanding you were an early beta tester of the original, what excited you most about the data model specifically for Financial Service Cloud? What are you most looking forward to doing with it as you thought through your evaluation?
Yeah, so more specifically, I think one of the things that we wanted to do was, set ourselves up to take advantage of what's coming to our industry through not just through Salesforce and through Salesforce partners, but the industry at large. There's so much happening. There are so many systems that are focused on servicing advisors and clients that are new, that are going to integrate or will provide data that we can take advantage of. And so this really gets into these things, these buzzwords that you've been hearing about for a long time around artificial intelligence or proactive notifications. So just thinking about the artificial intelligence thing for a minute, we think about it by asking questions. So what's most important to our client base, and what can we learn from them based on the data that we have, whether it's coming from in our own CRM system, whether it's the emails that we're capturing or notes and tasks or the behaviors that they're doing. What can we glean from that data that's most important to the client? Or conversely, what are we not addressing with the client based on the data that we've seen aggregated? And you can use AI to do those types of things. And so these are some of the things that we're starting to think about integrating into the system, but we can't do it without the right data model. And so that's one of the things that we've thought about. Proactive notifications are another one. They seem sort of mundane when you sort of think about them, but they can be incredibly powerful. And I think that there are a lot of tools out there today that can act as listening platforms where you can start to get proactive notifications on something that's happening with your clients. And so if I can push a notification to an advisor that says, hey, your client just had a liquidity event, do you want to reach out to them? Just a simple yes or no. It's just think of it as a pop-up. Or, hey, this article is relevant to your client's company. Would you like to send them this article? And those are some simple examples, but that's proactive reach out, very relevant to the client in a very timely manner, where you can automate it so that I don't have to put a body on that to go and search the web and make that happen. And so those are some simple ones that we think are nearer in term, going to be able to implement very quickly. And again, back to the data architecture, without a flexible system that can allow us to program those types of things, we wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jake. And so, it sounds like a lot to consider, but really when you boil it down, right, it's utilizing something that's cloud-based, which, as you mentioned back then, it didn't seem, or it seemed like heresy, as you said, which I really enjoy. Utilizing partners that are moving in the same direction as you are, thinking about being at the cutting edge of the industry to attain, specific features and functionality that.
Yeah, and I think there's a few other things that are going to start to happen, right? Today, you own certain parts of the data that you have as a firm, but then there's room for other data streams to start flowing in, whether it's coming from custodians or broader web searches. And I think those are also important things that we want to be able to take advantage of.
Absolutely. And certainly as you think about the open infrastructure of the platform and the ability to connect and integrate with, disparate source technologies, that's obviously key consideration for anyone out there, even just considering Salesforce at large, let alone Financial Services Cloud. Just reflecting back on some of that, proactive notifications, utilizing machine learning and AI, the ability to push more data to your users, a lot of that should resonate, with a broader audience for certain. it's a lot to think about, but even the format and process you followed seems to simplify it in such a way that if you're addressing the primary goals and the end state of the company and the organization, you should have sort of these things ticked off as you're thinking about it. I wonder, now we pivot a little bit into the second theme of today's conversation, which is, well, all of that is great. These are the criterion that we should be thinking about and sort of, the direction marching towards, but how do you do it? Right. So what do organizations need to know organizationally? How did you prepare for this migration once those, boxes were checked off and your decision was made and, you had buy-in across your stakeholders? How did you prepare for this? Right. It seems like a daunting task.
Yeah, it is a daunting task. I think that depending on your the size and scope of your organization, it can be more or less so. But nevertheless, I see a sort of the analogy I made was to the firm was, this is a little bit like a heart transplant with the patient awake on the table. I mean, we had to make a transition and do it in a way that had no disruption to the business. And our business is sort of a 24/7 business. And so that is a little bit daunting. I think that what we had to do initially was obviously involve quite a few stakeholders from across the firm, from all aspects of the firm. Once we decided that we were ready to make the jump, we still had a lot of work ahead of us in terms of designing or building the new version of it to reflect what we had, and then to keep in mind what the new functionality might be. And so having those key stakeholders involved in all of that from the beginning was super important. They ultimately were not only our advocates in helping us design the system, but also our advocates to the firm. And that's sort of around the why question. Why do we do this? And communication is more than half the battle here, both internally for your stakeholders at large. And so we constantly reiterate the why. Why are we doing this? What is it going to do for us? And it helps to get buy-in. It helps to keep people on the same page, because there is inevitably pain involved in transitions. And so you have to go back to that, why am I putting myself through all this pain? So that was one of the things that we did. And those stakeholders had direct input into designing the system. It's also crucial because the new system inevitably is going to change workflows. And so you can start to understand what the impact might be and help have them help us, the folks in charge of making the transition, to minimize the impact of workflow changes, right? Training is a huge piece. We'll talk about that separately, I think. But when you get down to training, you have to have all of these I's dotted and T's crossed. And so understanding the implication of the changing on the organization is crucially important. And this gets back in some ways to trying to minimize the complexity of the change. And so the way we thought about that was, we want to recreate what we had in a way that people are very familiar. They're going to see what they're going to be used to seeing, and then introduce the benefits or the new features and functionality to them in a way that they could digest it without putting onerous data hurdles in front of them. I mentioned earlier that ruling your CRM system instead of the other way around, having the CRM system rule you. If your people are spending too much time inputting data into the system, they become inefficient in their process, and it leads to a lot of frustration. And there's no rule of thumb here. Only your organization, the best. But there is a fine line between having to key lots of data into a system and then still getting out what you need. And so we think about that in sort of report types and those types of things. But we can talk a little bit more about that. But those are some of the things we did with stakeholders early on. And then once the system's designed, one of the things we did was we loaded a bunch of test data into it and spent a lot of time with the test data. And that was important because you think it's going to work a certain way, and then you throw, hundreds or thousands of tasks in there, or client records, or other things, and you start to see where some of the nuances might impact workflows. So that was another thing we did. And then the last thing we did was, I sort of mentioned already, was just lots of communication. So every single weekly meeting, talking about it. What's the status of the project? What are we working on? How are we getting there? What am I going to ask you guys to do ultimately, across the firm? Constant reminders on the why. Why are we doing this? We did a lot of sneak peeks along the way. So we had this core group with representative stakeholders from everybody, but we had sort of open Zoom meetings, which we'd invite anybody to join, that gave them a sneak peek of the project. And that was also great because I learned a few things there myself in terms of what we thought we had figured out and what a fresh set of eyes pointed out to us that we didn't. And so that ultimately helped us avoid some landmines along the way.
I'd love to reflect on a couple of those points, Jay, because I think again they resonate and certainly should be applicable for our audience. It's, of any project of this size and scope, you have to make sure that you have the stakeholders aligned, right? So that ongoing communication and reinforcement, the why we're doing this, the what is the end state or your North Star, and you made a great analogy there in terms of everyone organization is unique and different, so there's no silver bullet, if you will, right? And there's no rule of thumb. So making sure you have kind of alignment across the board, cross-functionally, have buy-in and reiterate that along the way, then designing the system so that it's not totally different from what they're used to and minimizing that friction, if you will. And again, you just can't overemphasize the communication aspect of this. And then the other piece that you mentioned, which is just more of an executional thing, which is loading the test data in there, right? So that you have that stakeholder group, that pilot group, if you will, testing it, right? Along that data model, that same theme, along that same vein, if you will, did you have to change any internal data models or make any data architecture decisions in preparation for the migration?
We didn't have to change the data sets that we brought over, but obviously, with any new system, there's new functionality, and by default, that means that there's going to be change, and obviously that's why we're doing this in the first place, right? It's sort of a reminder to everybody, if you do get any griping, it's, hey, this is the reason we're doing it. We're doing it because we want this change, and so embracing the change is an important thing to continue to communicate. So that new functionality drives new workflows. It could be old data that you've loaded in there, but the new workflows change the way you interact with that data. And so whether it's the way you collect it, the outputs, all of these types of things, the way that you click and view to, the standard view paths or click paths that you were used to change a little bit. And so those are things that, you have to constantly remind people of and then be very clear about what the benefits are for them. I think one sort of granular example of this between old Salesforce and new Salesforce for us was the relationship model construct. Wealth Management Edition didn't have a relationship model built into it. And so we sort of had shoehorned one together in our old way, but now we have this sort of more robust relationship aspect of FSC. And so that's an entirely new concept with an entirely new set of workflows that had to be built around it, but one that provides, great benefit to advisors. And this is one of the things that they liked about it. And so it can get complex. So I'm not saying it's easy, but there are, it's a really great way to be able to illustrate simply to the advisors and to operations folks and anybody that would look at a record, what the household looks like, who the players are in the household, what the kids look like, who the CPAs are, what business interests might be associated with the household, irrevocable trust. All those things can be mapped and included in the relationship, and you can even group households with other households. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's not. I'm making it sound easier than it is, but if you can work through that construct and break it down into its most simple elements for training purposes, then it allows people to get a common set of words and language, and then you build workflows around it. And people have been very happy with that.
Yeah, and you mentioned some there, Jake, although it may not be as simple as you're making it sound, as you've already said, but even just the visual representation of that data, right? You touched upon householding and how, you mentioned you had been able to build something bespoke prior to, but now having that in a centralized place so that, as your teams cross-functionally are collaborating, that's, I think, starting to talk a little bit more about the value of that data model and how you visualize, well, what does that stake, that household look like? And that's going to be unique for each organization, but just the benefit of knowing, as you mentioned already, those CPAs, trust attorneys between households and those complex relationships, having them in a visualization element that your advisors are able to utilize and leverage to the best of their overall ability, right? When you're doing things like annual reviews or having ongoing dialogues and communications with your end users and your stakeholders. I wonder if we might ask another question. This is the last one in this section in terms of considerations, but how long did the build phase of this migration, take? And kind of going back to this idea of it's not as simple as it sounds, but it can be if you think about this the right way. How long did it take to roll out the new instance of Financial Services Cloud to the entire team?
Yeah, well, I would say that we had the COVID moment during this process for us. So, I think, again, well, for us, it took, I think, from start to finish, about 8 months, including sort of a pause there in the middle when COVID hit, when everybody's reevaluating what's happening in the world. Including that pause, it was about 8 months. I think the actual build and delivery phase took us about 4 months. And I think that it depends how prepared you are going into it, which drives this time frame, and obviously how large your organization is and the training required. For us, with 75 people, that was where we ended up. But we did spend a lot of time in the beginning mapping out exactly what we wanted, and drawing out, page by page, UI and sort of whiteboarding the workflows. So we did a lot of that internally, even before really ramping up the project with EMS. And I think that helps too in getting everybody on the same page as you talk about the build. So those are some really key steps that I think allowed us to keep the timeline relatively tight.
You cannot overemphasize sort of the pre-planning, if you will, or pre-preparation required when you're taking on, a migration of this scope and size. So it sounds like you had made sure that your team was well equipped for that prior to even working with us. And so are there any tips that you would kind of throw out to the audience relative to that planning cycle? Are there learnings from that you've taken on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could write a small pamphlet on this, but the planning process on our side prior to the engagement of EMS was hugely important, because not only was it easier to communicate and for EMS to grasp what we wanted, which is always a challenge when getting sort of deep in tech build outs. But it also identified areas where we'd have to focus and spend more time understanding the implications of the new system when we went to build it. So, there's sort of these I call them sort of small circles where we have to go back and say, oh, now that we understand what we're actually trying to do, and we sort of better understand the new system, that's going to change the workflow. So we need to go back and think about, can we simplify that process? Can we make it easier? So those are some of the things. One of the things that I said generally to the firm was expect bumps. Maybe it's a little sandbagging on my side, but you want to make sure that people don't think that this is a snap of finger and everything's going to work just perfectly fine. And so we did a lot of communication around that internally, that there would be unforeseen outcomes, bumps that we didn't anticipate, ways that the technology, despite our best efforts, didn't work the way we expected it to, or the integrations that we had. And so, the next thing that we did was we impressed upon everybody, not just the immediate stakeholders that were on the project team, but the firm at large, was that none of this works without your participation. And so that was another sort of back to the know your why moment. Why are we doing this? And so it's important that people realize that in any relationship, it takes two to make it work, and you have a set of requirements in this process as well, to get trained up, to pay attention, to take the time to get to know what we're doing, to understand what's going to be required of you. And so those are some things that we spent a lot of time on early on.
You mentioned a lot about spending that preparation time early on, and then you made the analogy of the circle, kind of coming back once you've realized, well, this is actually what we're trying to build now that we've kind of uncovered or double clicked, if you will. Our CIO has a funny saying about that. Attack the problem, not the people, right? As you work through these kinds of things, inevitably there will be obstacles that come up or considerations that you hadn't anticipated prior to taking this on, right? I really do appreciate and want to make sure that resonates with the audience, that you impressed upon everyone that this doesn't work without their commitment to learn the new system, right? And to adapt to the change that's coming, right? Reiterating that why. So I just want to make sure that to echo that. It sounds like from what we've been hearing, though, overall it went well, right? And certainly in this section of learnings and what other organizations can do to learn from your experience, I guess, how did you manage the shift from one to the next, right? Did you do a lot of training? Did folks need to kind of work hand in hand with you? Did you have that built out? Or maybe we speak a little bit about, how you relied on your partners in this vertical, but any thoughts there in terms of training for your organization, for the stakeholders?
Yeah, training is the make or break thing. It's you can do the best job possible on the transition, but if the training is weak, then you're doomed. You're doomed. And so, yeah, again, we started with the why. We started with sneak peeks. This is very early on in the project. Then we started moving to screenshots, even if they were mocked up screenshots that we literally created, not EMS. Then we moved to formal trainings. This is now we're getting closer to the project go live date, where 3 weeks out from the go live date, we had trainings every single day at a standard time, and we mandated to everybody at the firm that they had to participate in at least 2 trainings. And then we recorded those trainings, and then we made PDFs of those recordings, and then we sent them to everybody on a regular basis. Every all hands meeting, we're talking about them. We had the key project stakeholders, going out and saying to everybody, you need to go to these training sessions. When people were in the training sessions, we said, help us out here. Tell us if you have a conversation with somebody, make sure, ask them, have they been to 2 trainings? And if they haven't, please tell them to come to 2 trainings. So we were sort of co-opting everybody at every turn to do that. And then when, so we had various types of trainings. We had sort of general overview sessions. We had very specific sessions on key tasks. We know what the key tasks are per sort of constituent. And so, for operations, they're working on tasks a lot. So let's do trainings on tasks. Let's do trainings on how they view tasks. Let's look at the queues. Let's figure out how the queues work for them. And then for advisors, something different. And so, we clearly titled all those training sessions in those ways so that people knew what they were signing up for. We sort of kept informal lists of people that attended, and and when necessary, admonished them publicly. A little public shaming never hurts to get them to come. And so, by hook or by crook, we had a lot of folks involved in the pre-launch period. And so that was crucial, because when it goes live, if you haven't done that training, you're already behind the 8 ball. And then when the project went live, we had standing open Zoom meetings all day long, every day for the first 5 days. So the project team just had, we're all sitting on that Zoom call all day long, and people could drop in and out of it. And then we went back to referring back to all those recordings that we had done when people asked us questions that they should have already known the answers to. And so, those are things that helped us to continually reinforce, the things that we wanted them to know and do. And of course, there were issues that came up that were, some either data issues or little tweaks to the system, or people wanted to have default views and set up in certain ways. And you just, run those down as quickly as you possibly could. Because it's if you don't do it quickly, then people lose trust in what they're doing. They try to go back to their old system, which is not what you want. And so those are some other things that were important.
Utilizing the users at the firm as advocates, right, as partners, as you go through this is what I'm hearing be one of the fundamental components to your success, right? So it cannot just be a top down, but it has to be all hands on deck, bottoms up approach where you're tasking folks who can, maybe raise their hand early on and who are quick to the learning curve and are leveraging that system, and you utilize those ambassadors, if you will, to help promulgate and evangelize sort of the system at large, so that folks aren't going back and regressing, right, to other systems or doing it the way that they've been doing it originally. And then, another point you made, Jake, that I just cannot overemphasize enough is just those trainings, right? It's at the end of the day, you have to keep steering the ship towards your North Star and emphasizing why it's a value for your users, why it's important for them to get skilled up, and the value they get from the system, right? That they wouldn't realize if they didn't invest the time required to learn how to leverage the new platform, right? I guess a way to close out the third section in our conversation on learnings is, what, I guess, advice, and you've already illustrated so many great points that hopefully resonate with our audience, but what advice, and I don't want to say what's the most important consideration, because I'd say they're all very important, but what advice, what key consideration, would you give to another financial services firm or another wealth management company who's thinking about migrating from Sales or Service Cloud to Financial Services Cloud? What do they need to be successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just summarize sort of some of the bullets that I've said already. Clearly articulate the why is hugely important. I would get stakeholders involved early on, design, testing, and rollout. I think training, like we just went through, is again hugely important, and it's really something that's never finished. We still train all the time on this, and we're building up that library of videos and PDFs for people to reference, and everybody knows where to go to get those. And when you get those sort of remedial questions that people should know, if they've looked at the trainings, then you can refer to them more quickly. You can give it to them in multiple formats, so that's hugely important. And then the last one is continuing to iterate, right? The system is sort of, I look at it as kind of a living and breathing thing as your business evolves. And so your system has to evolve as well. And so ongoing tweaks and obviously, assistance with users as they run into roadblocks or challenges is hugely important. And so those are the four things that I would say sum it up most clearly.
Awesome. Moving towards the last section of today's conversation around partnership, Jake, let's pivot slightly. How do you think about evaluating partnership for this, right? For a project like this, for this kind of an undertaking, but not only this one, but just other digital transformation initiatives, right? How did you evaluate partners for this migration? How did you come to find who would be the right partner for you?
Yeah, I think I'll start a little further back than where your question's pointing me, but I think the first thing obviously is having a very clear vision for your technology in general. Without that, without those pillars, without understanding what problem you're trying to solve, you really, that's the most important thing. You have to start there and have a strong foundation, because in today's world where technology is evolving quickly, or a lot of different systems are trying to build one-size-fits-all solutions, you need to understand what's the most important thing for you and for your firm and where it's going. So, that assuming that box is checked, I think the next thing is then, canvassing the marketplace for the solution that you're looking for, and really pulling all strings there to find players in the space that know that niche well, and can make sure that you at least take that first broad look at all the players. And then from there, start to narrow it down using the constructs, those pillars that I mentioned earlier. And then once you get into conversations with those folks, you're looking for, all of the normal things which would be, what projects have they worked on in the past? How close do those projects mimic what you're looking for? What integrations do you have to deal with? What integrations have they done? What are the direct experience with your integrations? Obviously getting examples and references and calling those folks, but looking through their core skill set based on where your project is going and what library of solutions they have available. is also hugely important because it saves ultimately you dollars and time, you the client dollars and time in getting it built, so that they're not learning on your dime, so to speak, and that you can leverage what they've done, and so that's hugely important. And then, just back to sort of the key pain points around integrations. Integrations are always sort of their own little ball of wax, and you need to know not only what the partner is able to solve for you, but any hurdles that where the data is coming from. And so that's sort of its own little side process that you're running in the background, is making sure that those data integrations are aware of what you're going to do. So it's almost like another part of your whole process is making sure that your other partners that you're going to rely on to provide and answer the really nitty-gritty questions about how data is going to move, that they're up to speed and they've allocated resources to you. So those are some of the other things that I would think about. So, and they need to know your why, because it takes it home for them in terms of your urgency, your requirements, and back to sort of working in partnership with your vendors to influence the direction they're headed. If they know your why, then they are much more likely to be interested in partnering with you to make sure they solve your problems. So
that's a fantastic way to round out today's conversation, Jake. Maybe time enough. I'm keeping my eye on the time, and I've seen questions filtering in, but time enough to ask you, maybe an off-work question, but this is one that I've leveraged from one of the podcasts I've heard from Tim Ferriss's show. But he asks his attendants, if there was a billboard with a message, what would it say and why?
I think my billboard would say one of the mantras you've heard me repeat many times here is know the why. That's simple. I think it applies to many more things than just this technology project that we're discussing here, but knowing the why in any instance, whether it's with your partner, with your kids, with your own motivations, I think it's a hugely important grounding question. It provides a lot of insight into the response that you start to answer that question with, or whether your vendor's answering it, or your kid, or your partner. I think those are all things that that can be pretty insightful if you really start to dig into that.
There you have it, folks. Know your why. I love it. It's a great message, and you're right, Jake. It applies to so many other factors in life, so many other aspects. So thank you so much for this, for that. I do want to just we've got 15 minutes left here. Taylor, did you want to just bring through a couple of the Q&A that we've seen bubble up throughout today's conversation, and then we can answer those in real time?
Absolutely, sure thing. So we got a question around integrations, and I want to expound on it because I too am curious. So the question is, were there any integrations that, Jake, that you and the team were using in Sales Cloud that you had to migrate over to FSC? How did that go? Was it difficult to remap those integrations, i.e. discovery data? And then also, was it a clear cut, this is me adding on a little bit, was it a clear cut decision that you were going to bring all of those systems with you, or did you also have to reevaluate those?
Yeah, so we didn't have migrations to migrate over. We've had this sort of philosophy that we didn't, for a long time, that we didn't want to have a lot of data integrations into Salesforce historically. For a lot of reasons. One, to segment systems, because they were all cloud-based, it's very easy to manage data across platforms. But having said that, we did create an integration from our performance provider during this project, and so we were piping in performance data into Salesforce, and so that was a new project for us, and required, as I mentioned, a lot of work from the performance provider as well. And so, we had to spend a lot of time doing that. one of the things that I do think is important, getting back to sort of testing and the build of this project, or as we built it, was that we actually did a test data migration. And I hadn't talked about this yet, but I talked about putting test data in there. We did that sort of on a manual load, but we actually took a small segment of our data and did a test migration, as if we were going to go live. And that actually found some things that we hadn't planned or anticipated, and that helped in this integration format also. So I would say that that's one of the learnings that I would put in my little pamphlet if I had the print one.
Taylor, thank you so much, and Jake, for that. It looks like we are reaching towards the end of today's conversation, Jake, and we won't belabor the point unless I'll give one more minute to see if any other Q&A comes in. Otherwise, that's pretty much everything we had for today's audience. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time out. We know you're busy and taking time out to join us to speak to the migration. Any other closing thoughts you'd have for our audience before I wrap us up?
No, thanks, JP. I appreciate it. It was really great to be here, and always love talking about these topics. And it's just amazing and challenging for all of us that wear the hat of technology to keep up with everything that's happening in our industry. You know, it's a full-time job to evaluate what solutions are out there and to sort through those solutions and try to map how they might benefit your clients or your firm. So I feel for all the folks on the phone that are in the seat that I'm in, and happy to commiserate with anybody or share some stories at any time.
Fantastic, Jake. Thanks again. And for those folks on the line, for more information on today's session, you know, the content will be featured on our website. So please reach out to us at consultems.com or reach out to me directly at jpmillan@consultems.com. We'll send across the recording. We thank everyone for your time this Thursday. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks. Take care.